But yeah, for anyone who hasn't done a salon before, or if you're a regular, welcome. My name's Alaka, and we're chatting with Pamela today. I'm just gonna admit some more people. So this will be recorded, but the cool thing is that unlike a podcast or a talk, we'll have a group conversation. I'll ask some questions to get things rolling, but you're all encouraged to participate, share observations, ask questions, because we're so lucky to have Pamela here with us to discuss her book. Um, Anytime you want to participate, you can use Zoom's raise hand feature, post in the chat. I'll also pause periodically to invite questions and comments. And then I request that everyone keeps their cameras on so that we can see all of your lovely faces. And please stay muted unless speaking. So I'm just gonna post that in the chat so that we all have it. So welcome everyone. My name's Alaka. I'm a healthcare researcher and I'm hosting today's conversation with Pamela Pavliscak, who is a design researcher and professor at Pratt. We're discussing her new book, All the Feels, which I've annotated because it's been such a good read. And here she explores how being online shapes our emotions and how a growing body of research shows that the internet allows us to be more fully ourselves and emotionally expressive in a way that benefits our mental health and allows us to connect more deeply with others. So she's written this as a field guide to understanding the emotional patterns of our increasingly digital lives, how we name feelings, amplify them, absorb collective moods, stay attuned to others, and engage with AI. So we're going to have a great conversation about this. So welcome, Pamela. We're so excited to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. I'm a fan of interintellect, so I'm sure this is going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. So I'll kick things off. One thing that you write about in the book is like, if the question is whether the internet is good or bad for us, we might never have a definitive answer. But you also point out that perhaps the more controversial response is that it might not be a question we need to answer. So tell us a little bit more about that and tell us how you came to write this book.
Yeah, I mean that kind of runs up against the current discourse because right now we hear mostly about how bad everything is. And so although there's like some counterpoint to that, but as somebody who's worked in tech for a long time and now teaches sort of the next generation of designers, I was like, yeah, I don't know if that's the right question anymore because our lives are so integrated. Like, I don't think we have so much, kind of investment in saying like we're going to go offline or we're going to, touch grass or whatever. But the fact is, like, it's pretty hard to extract one from the other. They're very integrated. Even if you don't have your phone with you, you are still influenced by internet culture and the language and what people are talking about. And you might be thinking about, things you saw online or what you might post online later. So it's like part of the fabric of our thinking and our feeling. And so that's kind of what I meant by that is like, well, it's fun to think about like, is it good for us or is it bad for us? But what's happening now is we're kind of we're kind of living in it. We need to figure that out a little more intentionally, maybe.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the research that you did is that you did a lot of deep qualitative research. You talked to
Yeah.
thousands of people, collected their diary entries. Can you tell us about what you learned from that, that a lot of quantitative or popular negative studies are missing about our rich emotional digital lives?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of studies that are about, that are kind of based, it tends to be two ways, like what we talk about. One is kind of survey based, where we ask people to self-report, usually on a scale or closed-end questions. And that can be good. I mean, it tells us something. It lets a lot of people respond, and that's a good thing. but it's also pretty limited. Like it doesn't get at the texture of what people are actually doing online or how, how it impacts them over time, because a lot of times it's a one-off. The other kind of social science research we see a lot is smaller experiments where you have a control group and then you have an equal size experimental group and you compare the two. And then I guess there's the bigger meta studies that take, try to correlate one thing with another. So we hear a lot about that right now, like Jonathan Haidt's work, I think comes to mind right away for that, where it's like looking at big, mostly survey-based studies and saying like, hey, does this social condition map to the rise of phones? And that's very controversial, and there's a lot of people pushing back against that, and rightly so. I'm a little less in that conversation because I was interested in a different question. I was like, well, how can I understand more about how people are actually living with technology day to day? And as somebody who's very influenced by ethnographic style research, I was like, I need to go deep and collect samples from the field, essentially. And so I had people contribute, video diaries and screenshots and folders, labeled for your research eyes only, and stuff like that. And used that as kind of my way into understanding. Now, it also involved a fair amount of like, my favorite tools for affinity mapping are a roll of butcher paper and crayons. And so it did involve that at some time to try to see the patterns, but that's kind of the approach I took because I was like, my first book was about how can we design differently? How can we design for well-being? How can we design in a way that's not addictive? And I think that's still a really interesting question, and there's a lot to think about there. But this time around, I was like, okay, what are people doing for themselves that's pushing back against this? That's trying to figure out how to make um, this part of their lives without being terrible and corrosive, right? And so that's kind of where the research came from is trying to look at a little bit more of that kind of like texture of how we're living online.
Yeah, and in the book you start talking about this through like affordances and adaptations. So affordances
Mhm.
being the properties of objects or online spaces that make certain interactions more likely. So it's kind of like the layout of things, but then
Mhm.
people are adapting to build richer lives within that. And I'm curious, are there any particular examples that you came across as you were doing your research that really illuminated this for you or surprised you that you would want to share with the group?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so I can say a couple of things that inspired this beyond just like working in tech and, interested in this question is I have three daughters. And so a big part of this was like, okay, I'm hearing all this stuff about like how bad it is, and I'm trying to contend with all of this as a parent myself. Um, how can I learn more about it? And one of the kind of opening scenes of the book is me doing something that a lot of parents do, I think, like you're driving your kids around and they're in the back seat and they're talking about stuff and you're kind of like, I shouldn't be listening, but I'm listening. And I want to know what they're talking about and what's going on. And so that was certainly a big part of it. And so if have read the book or do read it, you'll see like they make appearances. But there were other people too that really struck me. One person that kind of was early days when I first decided to start doing this kind of research. Um, was just really inspiring. I was working on with a client on a different kind of study. It was like a streaming video platform, and we were going into people's homes and observing like how they watched and having them host watch parties and all kinds of stuff like that. But he was showing me something on his phone, And there were all these pictures of butterflies. And I was like, what's going on with that? Like, that's really interesting. Are you like a collector or is this like an interest of yours? And he's like, no, my father died a couple years ago and a butterfly landed on my sister's shoulder. And now every time we think of my dad, we send butterflies to each other over text and we don't need to say anything further. And that was the first time that I really saw something like that. Now, once I started studying it, I saw stuff like that all the time, like friends who would check in every Friday for 10 years with like the reaction gift that summarizes their week or the meme and like it just like perfectly encapsulates their friendship or things like that. And so I was like, so there's lots of small inspirational moments like that, I think, throughout that have kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, and you share some of those in the book, and it
Yeah.
is a refreshing counterpoint to a lot of popular discourse that the internet is flattening our emotional lives or only amplifying certain aspects like rage or shock or
I mean,
so
it does
on.
do
And
that too. Like,
it does that too.
I'm not saying like, I'm not denying any of that, and I'm not denying like the way things are designed, which goes back to like how things are monetized, does move us in certain directions. And it would be, I mean, that should be an ongoing goal is to enact that kind of change. But yeah, the focus here is really like, well, what are people, I think of it in my mind as like soft rebellion, you know, like what are people doing that is like showing us the way forward? And maybe designers can learn from that too, but I think we can learn from each other about that. And so a lot of the book is organized, and this is a big challenge with writing a book about technology, as you can imagine, because it's like everything's obsolete immediately for one. And that was like one of the big challenges in writing it. And so this over many discussions with my editor, I was like, yeah, we need to focus on the patterns because you can reference like in a pattern like amplify, which is the third chapter. So the premise there is that we make our emotions bigger and more evident online because we can't see each other's faces and we're missing all that nonverbal stuff. But we've done this for years. And so we can look back to like emoticons as a way we did that, as well as whatever the latest, you know, TikTok pose is or the latest meme is. They're all on a continuum because they're all doing that same thing. They're all performing that same function of amplifying our expression so that we can better communicate with each other. Now, mostly that's helpful, right? Because there's arguments about like how much of our emotional expression is nonverbal. Some people say like up to 80%. There's a lot of argument back and forth. Let's just agree that a lot of it is. Um, but that can also be because we're missing that online. Sometimes it feels like way too much. Like we get overwhelmed with all the emotions online because it seems like everybody is like, you know, overdoing it. And if you take it at face value, it can be overwhelming. If you're cynical, then it's like, oh, that's just performative, and you discount it. So there are dangers there too, but it certainly is a pattern that helped me to organize it. So it wasn't like, oh, geez, we're gonna you know, be obsolete before we even start out of the gate.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, as you point out, it can be overwhelming to be immersed in the sea of intense emotion online. How can we develop the ability to tell, okay, these are my feelings versus these are the crowd feelings, or how can we be more present and have a healthier relationship there?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really tough one because we have to be a little more intentional about how we approach it. So, one thing I observed is that a lot of people who are feeling overwhelmed by their emotions actively reset the mood of their feed. So, and they do this by, well, there's some easy ways to do this. And just recently, some research came out, some, kind of more traditional social science research came out that validates this, is that if you just get rid of 10 toxic people and add in 10 new uplifting accounts, you're going to reset the mood of your feed. And so that's like an easy thing you can do. But I think being more intentional about how you interact too, a lot of the reason why we feel overwhelmed is because it's passive and we're just letting it in. But the people I saw that were having an easier time of it were more active. They were trying to actively connect with people, actively get curious about something and learn from it or about it. So I think those are the ways that we can sort of counteract it because the algorithms are designed in such a way right now that they do amplify the most intense feelings. And usually those are intense feelings we don't want, like outrage. I mean, outrage can have its uses for sure, but it can be overwhelming. Um, Amplifying intense joy or awe also works, but we just see less of that. So that would be another thing that I saw people doing where it's like, yeah, I want to introduce like more of that and less of, angry conspiracy theories or political posts or things like that. So um, you're kind of working like in, I don't want to say totally against what the feeds do, but do have to kind of be aware of it. And so I found that the people that were most successful had that basic, level of awareness and were trying to tune things a little bit.
So this is a selfish question because I'm often curious that like how do you find those good pockets of the internet? Like people might have the intention to be curious or have those diversified and interesting conversations, but if you're just joining a platform for the first time, the algorithm isn't always very friendly and it can be
No,
hard to know
that's
where
true.
all those people live. So how do
And
you
if
do
you,
that?
yeah, and if you follow your curiosity and your curiosity is like already a filter bubble, like how do you do that? So I think what people do, and it's a little bit kooky, is that people will think about stuff that they like offline and intentionally kind of search for that, search for people. Sometimes I had people though who were just like, I'm just going to look for stuff that's completely weird and that I wouldn't normally do, just to kind of recalibrate things and see what happens. And of course, there's a lot of resources now too that are devoted to sharing those kind of curiosity inducing posts, like Arena would be a good example of that. Or, there are definitely Substack accounts devoted to that as well, although those might not be as easy to find. So I think part of it comes from knowing yourself and trying to figure out like, okay, these are things I'm interested in. Let's try to find those through whatever way the platform allows you to do that. Often search or the discovery page. So,
Yeah. I mean, on the topic of knowing yourself and emotion, another thing that you write, which I find interesting, is that the internet is also giving people more precise ways to name their emotional states. And
yeah.
this is really important for well-being. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what you've
Yeah.
seen?
So this is something because I'm like, I guess I've been told I'm like extremely online. I don't think of myself that way, but I really take a lot of joy in like, oh, what's the latest word that everyone's tossing around, or what's the latest meme? And once I started looking at those, I was like, wow, these are really what I would call granular emotions, or sometimes they're frameworks, right? Like there's different types, and I do talk about this in the book. Like there's kind of long form frameworks, like she's a 10, but, or that feeling when, that allow you to get like really micro and niche with emotions. Um, there are other emotions that are more sort of metaphorical, like letting you, and that's always been a pattern that we've had with expressing our emotions, is like looking to metaphor in nature and weather and craft, even to explore our emotions. So I was looking at that and I was like, that's really interesting. But if you look back at emotion theory, what's been happening? It's been really interesting these past 20 years, because we've had a long period of time where emotions were more or less considered evolutionary, and that it was sort of like this instinctual thing. And we had a few that kind of were universal and motivated us in a certain way. And, that may be true more or less to an extent. Now that's hotly debated. But a big theory that kind of counteracts that, or at least integrates it in a different way, is this idea of emotional granularity. And that's been really coming to the fore from James Russell and Lisa Feldman Barrett, and I would say the last decade or so. And that theory says, you know, not so much of it is biological, like a little bit is. Most of it is our personal experience, our cultural exposure, the social norms, and we learn as we go along. And the more specific we can get with our emotions, the healthier it is for us, because we can learn how to manage them. We're better able to communicate them. And that's why we love learning about like foreign language emotion words, right? Like if you're learning about a new word in, say, Italian or Portuguese, you're like, oh, wow, that's great. Not just because we're curious, I mean, that's part of it, and we like novelty, but also because it's like, I didn't know other people felt this thing that I'm feeling. That's really specific. Like the example I always use is the word in Tagalog called jigil, which is probably the wrong way to say it, but it's like that feeling you get when you see a little fat baby wrist and you're like, I just want to pinch it, like we might call cute aggression, but it's got a whole word for a feeling. And I was like, this is amazing, because I've had that feeling like many, many times. And now I know other people have it. I know some cultures have a whole word for it. So it tells me something about like they're probably pinching a lot of cute babies or whatever. So there's that. But I was like, okay, why don't they talk about the internet? Because we're inventing new emotion words all the time. If you look at the Oxford Dictionary or Merriam-Webster for the past like 5 years, 10 years, a good percentage of their word of the year is an internet word that describes a specific emotion, like goblin mode would be a good example from a couple of years ago. Which is kind of like, a feral state of semi-collapse or whatever that you're enjoying, though. That's really specific, And so I was like, yeah, why don't those count? Because in a way, internet itself is a culture. Lots of people study it as a culture. It's a culture because that transcends national boundaries in a lot of ways. It's international. We have our own way of communicating. It's got its own set of social rules. Why would we not look to that to understand more about how we convey emotions? And then once you do start looking at it, you're like, oh, wow, we actually know a lot more about how we're feeling. Some of it's caused by the internet, but not always, right? And we're inventing these words together all the time. Some of them come from experts, like orthosomnia. That comes from experts. That's the feeling of a bunch of, behavioral scientists did a sleep tracking study, and they started to realize that people were getting worse sleep because they were obsessed with their sleep tracking numbers. Hence orthosomnia, and it's a whole like academic field now, practically. There's so many studies about it. So sometimes it comes from that, but mostly it bubbles up from the culture. And it's not just words, it's memes. And those are great because they're a really flexible template that encapsulate a lot of things. So in the book, I talk about this is fine, which is the dog sipping a cup of coffee in the flames. And I'm like, yes, this speaks to so many things. This speaks to, so many moments that we have in modern day society. And it because you've seen it a lot and it's still highly relevant and you can use it in a lot of situations, yet it's also highly specific. And so I think that part really excites me, as you can tell, because I just think it's really so interesting how we've invented new emotional vocabulary to describe the complexity of modern life.
Yeah, I mean, your book was the first one that put a word to that, the Tagalog word you just mentioned, because my
Yeah.
sister says stuff like that all the time. And growing up, we were like, is this weird? Because we had cousins growing up, and we are like, is this weird? Is this normal? Um,
Right? Because you're like, why do
yeah,
I want to hurt that cute little thing? Like, or like maybe you see a dog or a little kitty cat or something, you go,
yeah.
I just want to squish it. It's like, yeah. So,
Um, But yeah, for anyone who joined more recently, I will be pausing periodically for questions, observations, comments. So please feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or post stuff in the chat. I mean, I could keep asking questions all day, but I really want this to be like a conversation with Pamela. So um, feel free to raise your hand.
yeah, I would love that.
Um, but yeah, as I was also going through the book, one thing that came up was just how, and you talked about this a little while ago too, is just like technology is changing and our relationship to technology is changing. And one thing that's just really hard to escape is how we're engaging with AI. And interestingly, it's not also like a new phenomenon, right? Like we've had Tamagotchis and all
Yeah.
kinds of other, yeah.
Yeah. Or like I'm
Um,
strangely attached to my Roomba. I mean, I kind of fondly think about like I kind of miss like the dumb robots, oh, they're gonna make Siri smarter. Bummer. I'm gonna miss like the dumb Siri that it's like, you'll be Siri, call mom, and it's like calling Ron.
what do you
Yeah,
miss about the dumb
I love
robots?
that, or like my Roomba. I'm like, oh, you poor little guy. Why are you stuck in that corner again? Like every time, it's like, I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, we anthropomorphize. And you hear a lot about that. And you hear about like how, it used to be designing for attention. Now it's attachment. And it comes from that idea of anthropomorphizing. But that inherently isn't a bad thing. Like, that is how we figure out how to relate to so much of the world. We develop a theory of mind. And, like, is that thing a person? Is it living? Is it not? So, if we see eyes or we see movement or there's language, we're like, yeah, that's a being. Okay. We're gonna relate to it in a different way. And so we've done that, with many other technologies. The difference, I think, with AI is that it's more relational, like it's talking back to us. And so, unlike, say, your average customer service chatbot that can't really say much to you or Siri, now we've got, generative AI conversational interfaces that feel more natural. They feel like a conversation. And that tugs on our, instincts, which are like, yeah, we need to relate to it as another being. So in the book, I do talk about like, well, it seems to me like there are maybe healthier ways to do that and less healthy ways to do that. So I did one kind of fun co-design group of teenagers and talking about AI, and a lot of them. well, we talked about a lot of things came up, like how we're polite to AI. I mean, and of course, everyone jokes like, yeah, well, in case things go terribly wrong, we want to be polite to them. But part of that is anthropomorphizing, and part of that I think is probably a good instinct because social science and psychology research tell us that like we get into sort of habits of practice. So we don't want to, if we start treating things badly, the fear is that it could sort of spill over into other relationships. That may or may not be true. Like, I don't think there's been that much study of that. And I think about like violent video games and how controversial that was. And I don't think it's ever really been um, I don't think the finding is like if you play a violent video game, you become violent. It's not quite as simple as that. But anyway, a couple ways that I thought they interacted with AI that were healthier was one that we probably all do, but we might not talk about it, is, use it to figure out stuff, not just figure out like brainstorming what we're gonna post or for a work project or whatever, but also brainstorming like how are we gonna approach a relationship problem? How are we gonna frame up a difficult email or text to somebody? And so I talk about that in the book, and I think like using AI as a rehearsal space, even though, yeah, it might be better to talk to a friend. It might not, though. Like, I don't know about your friends, but not all my friends are totally wise. And then I've heard some people say, like, you should talk to anyone, talk to your grandma or talk to somebody. I'm like, grandma? Well, my grandma's dead, but like if I still had one, I don't know if she'd be able to advise on a difficult like email to somebody. So I can see why people do it. And I think, there we have to just use some common sense. Like we know that there have been many, many studies. This may be like the most consistent finding in all of the AI research is that if we know it's AI, we don't like it. And if we know it's AI, we don't like that you used it for us. It's okay if we use it for you, but it's not okay if you use it for us because it signals that you didn't put in enough thought and effort, that you don't value the relationship as much. So this comes up a lot for me, like just in my own life, because I have students and I'm not very scary, but they get nervous about emailing me, or sometimes they'll consult with me about emailing other people. And um, they some more than others can rely a lot on AI. And so I think that's a good conversation to have with people, especially maybe younger people, but even other people is like, if you're using it to sort things out, you don't want to take it wholesale and just use it as like, oh, this looks great. And I know I mean, honestly, I get the temptation for that too, because sometimes it's a lot smoother. And of course, and I talk about that too. There's been lots of studies about like how, AI communicates more smoothly and fluidly in certain situations than humans do. And we like that, of course, until we know about it. Um, so yeah, I think it's like a huge question right now. And one thing I don't know I'd be curious what you guys think about it, but one thing that strikes me in the conversations that I'm seeing now about it is that there's a lot of shame around AI use, like where you feel ashamed to use it. We shame each other about using it. We witness people being shamed for using it. And I don't know, that really bothers me because I just feel like shame doesn't help anybody. It just kind of like sends you into hiding and we don't talk about it. And that certainly doesn't benefit us. I mean, it might benefit OpenAI and anthropic if we just take the hit for everything. But like, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I'd be curious to hear it, or you, Alaka, too, if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to talk about it because at my company right now we're in this like very experiment with AI phase. So I'll
Yeah.
let the group chime in. So Liv, I think you have your hand raised.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Alaka and Pamela. So my question, I just kind of wanted to add on to that. I think part of what I noticed in my personal life with just, friends, family, things like that, it's that I think you make a really good point, Pamela. It's very fluid in many of these communication situations, and I'm very curious from, the work that you've done. A lot of things that you touch upon is just kind of our discomfort with the human, just normal human friction and how it shows up in online space. Because I think like anything online just gets emphasized, right? Like whatever we experience in our normal offline lives just gets emphasized and kind of characterized online. There's something about that transition that for some reason does that. And so I think the reliance on AI is just kind of like the security blanket, kind of like in Peanuts, how Linus has that like security blanket where people like think like, oh well, this will make it a little better for me. But I think it's a response to just the discomfort with just normal human friction like, in general.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's what I found, like most of the people that, I talk about in the book, and how people are adapting is in a way reintroducing friction into the experience, because so much of design, and I mean, I know this, I'm a designer, I've worked in the design world, I teach design. It's like trying to make things easy and smooth and frictionless. In some contexts, that's great. Like we don't want there to be a lot of friction when we're trying to like finish a work task or even buy something necessarily. But there's a lot of places it crosses the line to be too persuasive too. So that's a whole other issue. But I think like what a lot of people are doing, like before when we were talking about resetting the mood of the feed, or another way I talk about is like the difference between connection, which we kind of just toss about when we talk about online, versus like attunement, where we really try to cultivate intimacy and getting to know people better. The big core difference in all that is putting the friction back in to the places that matter. Our human relationships is a big one, but also like how we create, how we, get curious and learn. I think, across the board, whether it's apps or social media or websites or AI, the impulse on the design side of things is let's make things very fluid and smooth. And that's, as you say, it's not always the best thing for creativity and relationships and, that the things that are really meaningful to us and make life worth living and kind of, give our humanity some kind of weight and purpose. So I think that's such a good observation.
Yeah, kind of on a tangent to the friction piece. And maybe this is just me not using LLMs effectively, but one thing I found is that in order to get good responses when I'm brainstorming or working on a project, I have to put so much thought and effort and context in that the output doesn't always really surprise me. Like it'll give me some feedback or counterpoints, but it doesn't surprise me in the way that real people do. And I think some of the best feedback I get is still from people. So I have
No.
to remind myself of that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. I mean, I think there's a place for it for sure. Like I think about some of my own work, really specialized. Not everyone wants to talk about it, and sometimes it just helps me. I don't know if anyone else does this, but I'm often, like I'm just walking around the neighborhood and talking through my thoughts, whether it is to my phone or just to myself, because there's something about like having to articulate it that brings it into brings it to life. And so I think, LLMs can kind of serve that purpose, or I'm like ADHD, so everything's a mess. Like the research for this book, I wish I had AI because it was like a huge mess and a lot of different formats. I was winging it. Like I used Dscout for some. I had my own tool for some, like Obvi, like all different sources. Um, and I'm kind of a messy thinker too. And so it would have helped me so much to be able to even just the act of like typing it all in and then getting like, what are 10 ways I could organize this? Like, where do I put this thing? So I think there's some value there. But as you say, it really depends on what you're using it for too. I think that Kat has her hand up.
I do. Thank you so much. This has been super interesting. I've been taking notes. I think around the shame question,
Yeah.
I have a lot more shame around something like using Instagram
Mm.
or Facebook
Well, me
than
too.
okay. Well,
I've got
I'm
that
just saying
shame as
like
well.
it's I thought about it. I was like I think I have such like specific things around chat, like the different AI things I use, and I really appreciate it. And also I know its limitations because I worked a lot in it.
Yeah.
And I always encourage my clients to use it, but just buyer beware.
Yeah. Oh,
Because a
yeah.
lot of the information, it's just wrong. But
Yeah,
that's my experience. But
for
I
sure.
only
No,
learned
I
that
think that's
by using it. And I think it's just like get in there, use it because so many people are afraid of it or ashamed of it as well. And
or
I'm
they get
like,
peer pressure not to use it. Like, I don't know
yeah,
if any of you are on Substack, but I think that's like a huge part of Substack is like shaming other people for using AI. And the whole time I'm thinking, like, you're probably using it. You put maybe, I mean, there might be some people who are using it, they don't even know they're using it because it's so baked into everything now. But also, I just don't think that helps anybody. But as you say, you kind of need to know the limitations. And I do talk about that in the book. Like one wave that's happening in the research that kind of was just starting as I was wrapping up writing this book, because it takes like about a year for it to actually come out. But was attachment theory and looking at that in relation to AI. And not so much as destiny, like, oh, you're securely attached, so you'll be okay, but more as like a lens, like, okay, if we could understand what secure attachment looks like in the context of engaging with an LLM. And, a lot of that I saw in my own study participants, which was like, yeah, they use it, they're not afraid of it, but they know its limitations, as you say, and they know even there were some people like, oh my God, there was this one man and he had lost his wife a couple years earlier and he began talking to his chatbot and he's like, I know it's not her and it's not even a real person, but it just gives me some comfort to kind of remember her and be able to talk about that because not everyone wants to talk about it. And I was like, yeah, I think that's okay. Like I don't think there's a problem with that. And I mean, this is a long-standing theory of the internet back to the 90s in Carnegie Mellon. It's called the this idea of displacement, that if we interact with something online, whether it's other people or they hadn't really anticipated AI at that point there, they were talking about like bulletin board discussion groups back in the early 90s. But they're like, if people start interacting with anonymous strangers on the internet, they're going to want to interact with their friends less. But what the research has shown over and over again with like each new technology is that that usually doesn't happen. Like it's only a very tiny percentage that happens. So when we hear news stories about people having, like falling in love with their AI companions or developing AI psychosis, that's real. And that certainly affects a small percentage of people. But I think most people, it does not. So,
Can I ask you one more question
yeah,
before
sure,
I see
sure.
John's hand is raised? But
Yeah.
for me, when I look at my trajectory and my life, what the internet's done for me is it's just further niched me into the things I enjoy that I might not have access to.
True.
Like even
Yeah.
this group right now that I would not potentially have access to in my day-to-day life. Like I get on Reddit chats of like I just watch a documentary and I just like part of what I love is watching the documentary, but then I love getting on the Reddit chat
Oh,
and
yeah,
chatting with people
totally.
about it and like just it just makes me laugh. And like most of the time no one's watching the documentary in my life. I rely on that Reddit chat to fill a need for me.
Totally.
And so it's just I would say like even chat, it's just allowed me to further niche out into other things I'm really interested in, which is both good and bad, right?
Yeah,
Like
for
there's I
sure.
can see the negatives to it because then you get people more further radicalized or like what you're talking
Right.
about some of the design of these things. um I I don't know. What are your just like last question, what are your thoughts
Yeah.
on saying like Reddit? Because I don't know why. I don't feel any shame going like Facebook and Instagram. I feel like in my head I'm like such a waste of time. But like if I want to go on, I will go on Reddit after I've done something. And I often won't
Well,
post
I
it.
do the same thing on
Okay.
Reddit. Like, I'm like, as soon as I'm watching a show, uh, I'm on Reddit, and I feel like it's probably less problematic. Like Pinterest, I feel like that's the least problematic platform, actually. And I don't know. I I accept that I might be wrong about that, but I feel I've done a lot of study of that, and that was always one, and Reddit too. And I mean, I appreciate about Reddit that there are rules of the community, and I think most of the discussion threads sort of adhere to those, or it seems like there's moderating happening, or people are moderating each other, and it feels very active and not passive. I think what's happened with a lot of like Instagram, Facebook unevenly, that's a special case, and maybe TikTok in some circles, is that it's become less social and more parasocial, right? That we're not connecting with our friends, we're following influencers. Now, this isn't always true because I'll have to say, like, okay, I just saw both Backrooms and Obsession. Amazing. And I love that we're all into horror now because I'm like, that makes sense because everything's horrible. But the thing is, what is so great is like that's totally not passive. How are young people especially, but even not young people like me finding out about it? It's through like edits and discussion, and that's on like across a bunch of different platforms. And then you go to the movie, and we've all seen like the Washington Post and New York Times thought pieces like, oh, finally, Gen Z is going back to the movies. Hooray. And but then what do they do after? Well, they use technology as nature intended, which is they go back and they do edits and they talk about it and they discuss it. And so I feel like that participatory nature of technology, from what I've seen, is generally positive. I mean, people can, as you say, get into conspiracies or niches and become more and more convinced of a certain point of view that's unhealthy. Part of that's design, but not entirely. So I think, we tend to put a lot of weight on the power of design when it really is as much the content as the design itself, that is important. So anyway, but John's been waiting for a long time, so I'm gonna be quiet and let John talk.
Fascinating conversation. I've enjoyed listening to y'all. Sadly, I have no comment directly to what y'all are saying
That's
beyond
okay.
that. But I have a compliment and a question, Pamela. The compliment is this. I started reading the book Monday night, and in the second chapter where you talked about Darwin and then the New Guinea and Germany
Yeah.
researchers saying that there were universally recognized facial expressions, I wrote in my book, she needs to read Lisa Feldman Barrett.
And then like 2 pages later or
And
something.
then, yeah, and then 4 pages later, you start talking about psychological constructivism and how emotions are made. And I just was happy throughout the rest of the book, uh, anytime her name or her concepts came up. So thank you for being ahead of the
Yeah, I mean,
game.
I think it's just, we've moved on in our emotion theory, and it's been really rich in the past, I would say, 2 decades. Besides constructivism, you have, linguists getting more involved in the study because of constructivism. You have philosophers thinking about like how does emotion impact our decision making and how we articulate our values. So that stuff is all great. But I'm glad that you saw that, because I was like, yeah, and that's pretty important too, because if you all know me, I have long been involved in AI that tries to detect emotion, and that's been a big fail about that kind of AI, is that it was based on kind of a simple universal emotion model for a long time, and wasn't very satisfying. That's for sure.
My question is this. How did you decide when you're constructing the book, the bit that ends the 6 A chapters with the stoic and romantic response?
Oh yeah.
Was that like always in your head, or did you, shouldn't say tack it on, but did you fold it back in, or did you need something, or creative in terms of the creative process, how did that bit
Yeah.
end up in the book? Over.
Well, I think it was kind of a collaborative effort because, my editors were like, well, there's a lot of good sort of advice in this, but like, how are you gonna frame it? And so, as I explained in the book, I kind of went back and thought about it, and I went back to my students' work. I give them an assignment every semester. We just wrapped it up because I'm teaching a summer term online for Pratt this summer, which I don't often do, but that I have them design a mode for their phone that maps to a mood. And every semester, they surprise me with incredibly creative ideas. Like one person this last semester turned in something that said she was like, "Well, I went to Lake Placid with my family visiting from India, and it reminded me of something, but I couldn't remember what it was." And then later, like 2 days later, I remembered it was where I went to boarding school in India. And there was a lake that looked like that. And she's like, so I want a deja vu mode on my phone that will tell me, like, what is this reminding me of? Go back in my photos and look and see, and so, and I had, students, she's like, I want a little avatar of my face in the corner of my phone. And then I can look at that and it'll be like homeostasis mode. Like if I can see from my face reflection, like if I'm doing okay or not. And like so many things like that. But when I started looking back at them, because now I've got like hundreds of these, I was like, they really fall into two camps. One is I want to regulate my emotions. I want to be calmer. I want to tone everything down because it's too much. It's too overwhelming. And there's too many emotions, and I've got to do something about that. And then the other movement was I just want to feel everything. I want to feel more deeply. I want to like melancholy mode. I just want to like all the sad songs from my relationship that, the boyfriend who just broke up with me. I just want to be like in it. And so to me, I was like, well, what are two movements that are still so evident in the popular imagination? It's Stoics and Romantics. So even though it's historically anachronistic, they're from two vastly different periods. I was like, yeah, we're still fascinated with the Stoics and this idea that we can kind of manage ourselves and rely on, kind of this a bigger picture to kind of regulate our emotions. And the romantics, you still see that everywhere in the culture too. This idea of romanticism is still very captivating. It's like, yeah, we want to feel awe We want to feel wonder. We want to feel strongly about things. And we don't always get that with technology. And so so it kind of evolved as the book went on because I was thinking about this issue and I was like, yeah, that is a good question, Maddie, who's my editor. But I'm like, I'm not sure how to address that. And then I think what happened is I did that assignment again, and I was like, wait a second, I'm seeing something here. So, and that helps me too, because I feel like I want both of those things. Sometimes I do really want to like step back and chill. And other times, although I'm not like much of a meditator or anything like that, but sometimes I do want to step back and chill. And then other times it's like, yeah, I just want that texture, that more emotion. Like the chapter on augment was kind of a fun chapter because it's, looking at all these ways that like technology affects us physically and especially our senses, so and we try to add that back in sometimes through, older technologies, like certain gaming devices will let us do that, or the shocks, like headphones. But also, um, ASMR is a great example. That's like really filtered into everything. Like we might not go and watch ASMR videos and whisperies into microphones and brushes and things like that. It's in advertising, it's in TikTok videos, it's like everywhere, that kind of like trying to bring that sensory texture back in. So, anyway, that was a very long, digressive statement about that, but it's such a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can keep continuing to field questions and observations. Or Pamela, if there's something that you think that we haven't covered yet, like a favorite part
Well,
from the
I think
book.
one thing I get asked a lot was sort of like, do you ever succumb to any of these bad habits?
Mm.
Even though you know about this stuff, I'm like, yeah, I still do all the time. Like my worst thing is like several nights a week, I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be like, what would be a great thing to do right now? I'm gonna scroll my phone. Like that's never calms you back down. That never puts you back to sleep. It's always a mistake, but I still do it a lot of times, even though I know. And I'm sure like we all do that and that those kinds of things, we know they don't make us feel good, but we still do them. But I try to use that as like my guiding principle is okay, how does this make me feel? That's usually a great starting point because if I can really step back and think about that, then that helps me to understand, is this a technology, a platform, a practice, a group that's nurturing or that that isn't. So I don't know. And I think that changes over your lifetime too, or just your situation. Like a lot of people, I know we all like to, downplay Facebook, for instance. Um, but I had a lot of even younger people talking about Facebook because marketplace and
Mm.
local groups. If you're not in a big city, you do not have a local paper anymore. And a lot of people go on it for like highly specific things. And to me, I'm like, yeah, that's good. Like you've got a need for community and like you're feeling it. And I can relate to that myself because I live in a semi-rural place. And so much hot gossip on Facebook. Oh my God. Like somebody's dog was missing the other day. Everyone got involved until finally somebody like got in there and was like, yeah, I see Edward, that was the dog's name, walking up your driveway right now. And everyone's like, yes. So anyway, there can be those moments
Yeah.
online. Kat, did
Yeah,
you
I
have another
think
question? Oh, go ahead, Alaka.
I don't know.
no, I just
I'm
had a
oh
yeah, I was gonna invite Kat and then make a like comment somewhat related to yours.
Yeah, go ahead.
um I was at a play, like an interactive play recently, where we all had to turn our phones in. Well, you had the option to turn your phone in at the beginning of the play, so you wouldn't take any photos. It wasn't just for the photos. The whole point of the play was to put down your phone. I
Yeah.
mean, so they had like a little card catalog they brought out, and they locked everyone's phones in it. But you didn't have to. But you got
Yeah.
like a something from a card. The play was very much centered around older technologies and questioning, what does it feel like to be in a very interactive play where we're broken in small groups and we're doing all these interesting things without having your phone to document it. And
Yeah.
it totally was like I found myself a little anxiety around it, not having my phone with me and then not be able to document some of the cool things that were happening. So I guess I just wanted to name like that was just even like the fact that your phone's by your bedside. My phone's by my bedside too. I think a lot of people's phones are by their bedside, even though I know that's not a good thing. And um like
Yeah,
the
like
amount
we
of
all throw that
anxiety.
advice that's like, oh, you should not look at your screen before bed or keep it in another room. I mean, that's called,
Mhm.
but your anxiety has a name. It's called nomophobia.
I was curious. Okay. Yeah.
And it's been well documented that people get anxious without their phone. And it's another thing that we sort of like shame people over. We just are like, hey, you just need discipline. Just don't do it. And I don't, to me, I just want a less harsh reality. I want things to be less like a light switch mode, right? Because right now it's sort of like you either detox or you're like, ah, yes, I'm scrolling. And I'm like, I want something in between those two things. And that's what a lot of the book is about, right? It's like, how can we actually like live with it instead of just like putting it away for a while and then coming right back to the same behaviors. I mean, there's a lot of things like that. And we know that detoxes don't always work. Sometimes it's kind of like yo-yo dieting, where like after the detox, you reward yourself by spending even more time on screen. That's been documented. Not in all cases. But we also know not all screen time is the same either. So your anxiety about not being able to like take a photo and see it afterwards. There's kind of like, I think there's a middle ground there, right? Like you don't want to be taking photos the whole time so that you don't experience any of it and you can't talk about it because you're like too busy photographing or everyone in front of you is. But at the same time, it's really nice to have a photograph afterwards because you can savor it, you can remember it, you can share it with somebody, you can talk about it with people online, you could remix it into a meme, you could do all kinds of things with that photo that are meaningful and that add to the experience or extend the experience. And so I think like being all sort of like all or nothing doesn't really serve us so well in a lot of cases anymore. And that, I don't know, to me, that's a really, really frustrating thing. That's actually just inside story about this book. That's like a frustrating thing about the book too, because I think our public discourse is really engaged on, you know, either you detox or you don't. You're all in and there's no in between. And ironically, I just participated in like this Times Touch Grass challenge as like one of their experts. And I was like, well, I told the reporter, I'm like, well, that's actually not the point of my book. And she's like, I know, but like, let's just go with it. I'm like, okay, fine. But what if you want to go back online? So that part was about hangouts, and it's like how it's good to be in the moment when you're in the hangout and maybe not like letting yourself off the hook up front, because a lot of times if we know that we can text each other, it's a lot easier to cancel or reschedule. So that might not be the best use of it. But I don't know. I think about like so many times pre-phones when I'm hanging out and it would have, we looked at movies together, we listened to music together, we did other things that involved various kinds of played games that were, video games, basically. We watched MTV. So it's like, so I don't know. And then of course after you're getting together with somebody or seeing a play or going to a movie, we're human beings. We actually want to talk about it and we want to remember it and we want to extend our relationship with other people too. So like if you went with somebody else, you might want to share your photos afterwards. I think one thing, one little thing I talk about in the book is like digital love languages. And one of them I call phonecting, which is when you're using technology together. And one of my diarists was like, yeah, the best part of the vacation is like when I'm just laying on the bed in the hotel room next to my husband and we're airdropping photos to each other. And I was like, yes, high five. I like that. Like, of course you do. Like, yes, you can talk about it, but it's okay to have a prompt, like a visual prompt for that conversation. So, yeah, so I get why you have mixed feelings about that. I would too.
Yeah, I just had a comment a while back in the conversation. I mean, you were talking about how for you it's important to like pay attention to how a certain piece of technology or interaction is making you feel. Like, I think I try to live by that, but the other thing I try to pay attention to, especially with LLMs, is like how is this affecting the quality of my relationships? And what I mean by that is there was a point where because you can just ask Claude a lot of things for troubleshooting and
Yeah.
to learn about a subject, I found that I wasn't talking to people about those things as much. And I
Yes.
know that often people just take a lot of joy in explaining their hobby to you or some topic to you that you could very well look up. So yeah, I just
Yeah,
try to
no,
be
I think
attentive.
that's absolutely a part of it. And you were, in tune with yourself enough to realize like, oh yeah, that's maybe not the best thing. Like sometimes it is good to talk to people and ask them about certain things. I think with LLMs too, they're so validating. I mean, and validation is good to a point. It gets you to open up. So, like, if you had a friend who never validated you at all, you probably wouldn't be friends, actually. But it would be rough. Um, but when you're validated all the time, then that starts to feel strange. I think to most people, it feels good, but then you're like, wait a second, this is off. Like I need that again, sort of that friction, that pushback, like a little challenge, like something that makes me question things a little bit because that there's some joy in that.
So you've been studying how people feel about and engage with the technology for a long time.
Yeah.
What are you researching next? Like, is it an extension of this book? Is it something else? I'm curious.
Yeah, so well, I'm really lately, of course, as everyone interested in AI, and we have a lot of new feelings about AI. I think it's really interesting that we're not really articulating them or sharing them. And I think it is kind of goes back to this shame issue. So I'm very interested in that topic and looking at like what are those emotions? Who's talking about them? How do we talk about them? What are the implications of that? So that's one thing I'm interested in. I'm also interested, though, like from a design perspective, still, I feel like we still have a pretty crude understanding of how design shapes our emotional experiences. We know some things. I think we've all heard, like, oh, well, social media platforms are designed for engagement. They're designed to keep our attention. And they have things like infinite scroll or, social validation through likes. And of course, all the platforms have experimented with limiting those features too, on and off, or you can go in the settings and limit them. But to me, that's really crude because what I started seeing as I was writing this book is that certain really specific internet emotions are linked to the certain types of experiences we have online. So I'll just give you one example. Like I would classify several different emotions as infinite exposure emotions, emotions that occur because we have been exposed to so many people's feelings, one after the other or all at once. So then you have feelings like hyper empathy, which comes from the neurodivergent community but applies to online life. There's the term feels itself, which is sort of like inchoate, a little bit of everything, but also ironic because like humor is sort of the pressure valve of the internet. So it's like, well, I'm going to be a little vulnerable, but I'm also just going to distance myself a little bit. So you've got the humor there. You've got things like ambient intimacy that I would put in that infinite exposure category. So I'm working on trying to identify those two and just get a little more sophisticated about like how those emotional mechanisms work, and what kinds of feelings they produce and where we push back. So that's another. So those two. I'm still obsessed with this topic. I don't know why. It's like Kat was talking about her niches and stuff like that, and I'm like, I don't know. Like it's just to me, I think people are fascinating and we're presented with these new, complicated, but you know, just kind of ways of being in the world that are not like anything we've experienced before, where we're not, it's not like online and offline. They're so merged right now, and the technologies are coming like one after the other, after the other, after the other. I know we've had periods of great, you know, technological progress and expansion in the past too, but I feel like this is kind of new, the pace of things and the global exposure to these things. And so to me, that's just like endlessly fascinating.
I've never heard of infinite exposure emotions. What are those?
That's that's because I'm just identifying it. So that's what I'm saying. Like I think there are certain internet emotions that are caused because we're exposed to so many people's emotions all the time. And I'd classify those. Like if I was making a taxonomy, I would classify hyper empathy and ambient intimacy as like in that bucket of infinite exposure emotions because they're caused by that. So ambient intimacy would be like you see a bunch of green dots on Slack and you kind of get a sense like, oh yeah, people are working with me. It could also be anxiety producing too, or like on Spotify when you see people who are online and you see what they're playing sometimes. That would be like ambient intimacy where it's like, it's not just you're on social media and you're scrolling, but instead it's like people you know or who are closer in your circle and you're aware of their state in some way. So anyway, I got a million of these things. Like and like I said, I'm just like I don't know. It's a little bit veers toward unhealthy obsession, I suppose.
I mean, that's what produces interesting work.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
But yeah, I also want to open it up again to the group as we start winding down for any other questions, comments, thoughts.
I'll say thank you again. This is like giving me lots of fun things to think about, and I'm going to be a lot kinder to myself, I think, about my usage on the
Uh,
internet. So I
makes me
appreciate.
happy.
There's so
I
many.
think that's a good lesson to take away that I appreciate. It's like we need to be kinder to ourselves and maybe to each other too. We're all figuring this out as we go.
Yeah, I mean, another takeaway for me was just also to be like, I mean, I work with a lot of quantitative data in my day job, but it made me more curious about qualitative data and the richness in that text and
Yeah.
to think about it just beyond numbers. So thank you for sharing some of that research and for being so comprehensive.
Yeah. Good. Good. I'm glad.
if we want to follow along with your work, what's the best way to keep up with what you're writing and doing next?
Yeah, there's a few ways. I mean, you could connect with me on LinkedIn, easy. If you're on Instagram, I'm starting stuff on Instagram, and that's kind of fun. And then I'm also on Substack too, Feeling Digital.
Okay, I'm gonna find your Substack link and put
Yeah.
it in the chat.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Okay.
and there I'm sharing, I'm trying to share. I've been a little slow these past few weeks because of the book launch, but I'm trying to share a Friday feeling every Friday, like a new feeling. And then I usually do one other post during the week too. That's more like on a topic or such. So, trying, I'm trying. I missed a couple of weeks here with the book, but
What's the
I've already got them queued up, so don't worry.
what's the last Friday feeling that you shared?
I think it was feels because the book
Mm,
was launching and all the feels, but I've got a bunch of there. I've got like well, ambient intimacy is in there and hyper empathy, but also some others like seen what that feels like. Um, and then some I borrowed from other people too. Like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig.
mm, no.
He basically invented a bunch of emotions because he's like, you know what? We don't have emotion words for these different modern conditions. So if you've ever seen any cafe called Sonder, which is the sudden awareness of that somebody else has a life that's as rich and complicated as your own. That's his term. Um, but you'll see like cafes and stuff named Sonder, and that's his word. But the
Mm,
word that I took that is internet related is Vimadalen, which is the feeling that nothing is original because it's been captured a million times before. And so I think, like we get that taking photos because now all of a sudden we're exposed to how everyone else takes photos and we're not sure, like, is that shaping how I'm taking the photo? Is there even a point for me to take this photo? That all that stuff. So there's some of those kind of things in there too. And I think orthosomnia is in there. So I've got about like 15 so far, but I'm trying to put one up every week. So because I've got a lot.
I love it. I'll have to check those out.
Yeah. Yep. Great.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Pamela, and thank you everyone for joining today. Like this was so much fun. I have so much to mull over. The book came out on June 9th, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So
So
pick it up.
yeah. Yeah, for anyone who hasn't read it, I really enjoyed it. I know,
There's
John,
one
you're
last
reading it.
fun thing to contemplate. This is the US cover,
Mhm.
which is quite different from the UK cover. I think
I'm
that's so
curious.
funny.
Yeah, how are they so different? Like, how do they decide which one to pick?
Um, I'm not sure exactly. The US cover I had more input into and
Mm,
actually said I don't want it to be like a smiley face or an emoji because I felt like that was too simple. But the UK folks I didn't have any contact with, and they did a nice job with it. But it it's funny that they chose that they defaulted to that. So no shade to them. They're lovely
mm.
and it's a great cover. But I think that's so funny. And maybe that's something you'll notice in the future about books because I know a lot of authors, like if they have two or three different editions, each cover is a little different. And I've always wondered about that myself. And now I know it's happenstance. A little bit of cocktail party knowledge you can throw at people.
Like, yeah, thank you again. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. And yeah, I hope you all have a great rest of your week and read the book. And
Yeah.
yeah, hope to
Thanks,
keep following
everyone.
your work, Pamela.
Yeah. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Really enjoyed it. Have
Thanks,
a good
everyone.
evening,
Nice to
everyone.
meet you. Good
Thank
luck.
you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.